Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Minted Podcast. On today's episode, we have the one and only Tanner Campbell, host of Good Morning Podcasters, here on the show. And on this episode, we're actually going to talk about some challenges that people are having with NFTs and really some of the questions that are coming up, particularly as podcasters go into the NFT space. I think it's really important that we show all of the sides of this journey of podcasters using NFT and incorporating Web3 into their show. And that means that there's going to be some questions that are really good and some questions that are a little bit harder to answer. So I'm excited to hear more about Tanner's journey into this space and some of the questions that his audience of podcasters brought to him that are super important for us to talk about. So Tanner, good morning, podcaster.
Hey, man. How are you? Good morning.
I'm good. Tanner starts every show with Good Morning Podcasters, the namesake of his show. For the listeners that are not listeners of your show, you should be. It's a great show, publishing almost every day, that provides really, really actionable advice and industry news and stuff for podcasters. How did you get into that particular show? I know you have a couple podcasters, but like, what was the journey of actually getting to Good Morning Podcasters?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know if I've ever thought of that. I started podcasting in 2010, did a lot of things in the creative space, things that interest me, theology, philosophy, mythology, folklore. And I opened a studio in 2018 in South Portland, Maine. And when I did that, I wound up writing more from a podcasting-centric, recording-centric, audio engineering-centric perspective. And that kind of, in connection with Clubhouse, catapulted me into somewhat of a spotlight as someone who was very technically adept at podcasting and had a significant amount of marketing experience in addition to that technical skill. And so I kind of became a podcast, and I hate this word, but a podcast expert or a podcast guru without intending to. And that has been kind of the direction in which my career, as it were, has taken off. So I work mostly as a consultant and in some cases as a advisor to audio related or podcast related companies.
That's cool. It's really funny how many, it seems like there's a decent chunk of people, especially in the podcasting industry, that in the first 6 months of Clubhouse, when Clubhouse was in their glory days, and everybody in the world was on it because everybody was stuck at home and didn't know what the heck to do. And they could be on Clubhouse all day and their boss wouldn't know because they were working remote. It seems like that 5-6 month period launched a ton of people into new careers or new ventures that now Clubhouse is not necessarily a part of, but Clubhouse was kind of like the trampoline. It was really interesting.
Yeah, from about, I think, December of 2020 to August of 2021, myself and two friends would spend 5 hours a day, every day of the week on that platform serving podcasters. So it was, I don't know if you get 10,000 hours in that time frame, but it was a lot of hours of doing a lot of just people coming in saying, hey, what kind of mic do I buy? And I asked that question about 6 million times.
Yeah.
But I loved it. I feel like I'm best maybe that's why my podcast is a Q&A format most days. It's because I feel best in that capacity. Right. I like to be asked a specific question so I can draw on my experience to give a specific answer.
Right. I also want to ask you about what Good Morning Podcasters was, which was it was Podcasting Sucks before the rebrand, but yeah, I understand why you did the rebrand, but I also just remember thinking man, Podcasting Sucks. This is such a great name. Why does that phrase kind of resonate with us as professional podcasters where there's this love-hate relationship?
Because it's hard. Because there are so many, you start podcasting thinking I'm going to do this fun thing. People are going to like this fun thing that I'm doing. And then more people will find out about it because those fun people will tell the other people who think it's fun that it's fun. And then nobody does that. And you're like, well, how come my audience isn't growing? I'm spending 10, 20 hours a week on this podcast. And
everybody who knows me will love my podcast, listen to my show and share it.
Right. And none of that ever happens. And so you think you're signing up to record your voice and be fun and have fun and be cool, be famous, maybe popular amongst your niche of content lovers. And what you really are signing up to do is learn the hard way how to become a marketer, learn the hard way how to become a salesperson, learn the hard way how to stand up all kinds of platforms you've never touched before. I mean, before I started podcasting, I'd never even heard of Stripe. I didn't know what a Patreon was. I'd never heard of I don't even think I'd ever heard the word monetization.
Well, when you started podcasting, a lot of those things, I mean, Stripe was probably, Stripe was a company, but like, no, there was no Patreon.
No.
There was Libsyn.
Yeah.
But there was
I remember when
not a lot
Patreon first came into existence, podcast listeners were like, how dare you? How dare you suggest that I pay for your podcast? It was a whole different world. I think that was 2013 or 14 or so when Patreon came out.
Yeah. And walk our listeners through like the different podcasts that you have now or that you're like working on that are like Tanner Campbell shows. Cause there's a couple different ones and I love it cause they're focused around your different interests in really unique ways.
Yeah. The first one is of course, Good Morning Podcasters, which is more of my professional shows. That's how I think of it. My career show. The second is Practical Stoicism, which is about what it sounds like it would be. Stoicism is kind of a stodgy and intimidating philosophy to approach as a new person. When I say new person, I don't mean recently born. I mean new to the philosophy, trying to learn about it. And I have a third that I've just launched and a fourth that is coming. The third is called The Dictionary of Mythology and Folklore, and it's a daily, Monday through Sunday, where I take a character, theme, artifact from mythology and just give a quick 1 to 5 minute synopsis of what it is, the role it plays in the culture it comes from. And hopefully that encourages listeners to not just learn a new thing every day, but to say, oh, hey, that's cool. I didn't know about that. I myself am a fan of mythology and folklore. I should go and try to seek stories out that use those characters or have those characters or artifacts. And then I make some reading suggestions in the podcast to help them do that. So for me, the real reason I launched that, two-part. One, I really like mythology and folklore. It comprises like 95% of my home library. And number two, or B, I can't remember what I said, A or B, is because that new podcast is coming out with Jam Street Media, is a weekly sound design, very high production value. And I'm thinking I'm going to use this daily podcast that only takes, maybe an hour's worth of my time a day to create, to promote that much longer, more high production value podcast. So I've created a podcast to promote a podcast. And I don't know if I'm the first one to do that, but it's certainly the first time I've ever done it. And I'm interested in seeing how that works out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love that you have these shows that are like so deeply connected to the things that you really, really like. And your Practical Stoicism is like one of the top podcasts it's been on some good charts in that space. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it has cracked the top 40 in the UK on Spotify. It's cracked the top 30 in the US, which I was blown away to see, also on Spotify. And its rankings on Apple Podcasts are lower because of the number of podcasts I think on Apple Podcasts are greater than the number of podcasts on Spotify, and Spotify doesn't categorize things the same. Mm-hmm. But in Apple Podcasts, within its own category, philosophy, it's currently ranked like number 36 or 35 in the US, which is terrific. I mean, I couldn't be more happy with the show.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really great. So a couple months ago, we started talking about NFTs in podcasts. We started hearing about some platforms, getting connected to some. You decided that you wanted to bring this kind of idea to your listeners and also kind of launch an NFT. And you mentioned that on Good Morning Podcasters. And was everybody really, really stoked about it? Like, tell me about your audience, how your audience responded to you saying like, hey, I'm a podcaster and I'm going to launch an NFT.
It was 50-50 pretty much. Either people were psyched that I was doing it because they're the kinds of people who are like, oh, cool, the novelty of NFTs, blockchain for the win. Like those people were like, this is great. What a great idea. And the other people were like, this is morally irresponsible. You shouldn't be doing this, or this is a scam. People are getting grifted. So I got the whole spectrum, really not even the spectrum, just the two ends. Nobody seemed to be in the center of the spectrum. Nobody in the middle. And it sent me down a rabbit hole of discovering some things that actually are problematic with NFTs that I was completely unaware of. I mean, I grew up in the 90s mostly. I'm an 80s kid, but I grew up mostly in the 90s. I was born in 83. And, I was the kind of kid who built his own computers. I would go to A1 Computing on Dixie Highway in, I think it was Lake Worth or West Palm in Florida. And I would get computer parts to build my own computers. I've had a technical career before I got into podcasting. I had 20 years as a sysadmin and as a technical support engineer. And so I was a technical person, but more so in a hardware and like operating system standpoint, maybe a little bit of cybersecurity. I didn't really know anything about NFTs or blockchain really. And I would say that I still don't in comparison to the people who really know it. I feel like they know an ocean full of things about the blockchain. And I know, maybe one of the smallest of the Great Lakes. So there's a lot that I don't know. And that I'm learning, and that the questions that my listeners ask me, it set me on a journey of, okay, yeah, there are some real problems here, but it also seems like there are some solutions that are being worked on. And I've come to this position or this vantage point on it, that if this technology in its best form, blockchain, is ultimately a benefit, then we have to get there. But that means that we have to support an imperfect version of blockchain so it can get there. So it's this very difficult, for me, moral discussion about, is it worth supporting something that's kind of broken and has a lot of imperfections for the sake of getting to where it's going to get if we commit to it? Or do we say, I don't know, those imperfections are too imperfect, they're too problematic, and even if this does get to a place where it's 100% great and we love everything it does and it's a real benefit to humanity and creators and all that, the problems are still so bad that we shouldn't. I've made the decision of the former, that we should commit to participating in this and furthering the technology so that we can get there, even if that means we have some problems along the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's such a good perspective of realizing, like, okay, if we believe this technology is going somewhere and in the end it's going to be extremely beneficial, which I believe it is. And one of the things I find interesting about blockchain and cryptocurrency is I've yet to meet somebody. There's probably somebody listening that's going to prove this wrong. So please reach out to me so I can now say I've only met one person that has, the more they've learned about blockchain, the less interested they've become. And like there's a lot of topics in our society where the more people educate themselves about a topic, the more polarized people become, or, they send into certain camps. It seems like with cryptocurrency and with blockchain, the more that people educate themselves, the more they become aware of like the value of this technology in the long run. Sure, there's still some different opinions and different camps of the route to get there, but I think your approach is really healthy of saying it's not perfect yet, but we kind of have to support the imperfect version in order to, foster innovation to get there. Some of your listeners mentioned, what was it, morally irresponsible for you to produce an NFT?
Yeah, I don't think it's uncommon, or I don't think it's a stretch to say that most podcast creators are artistic.
Yeah.
They've got more of probably a liberal mindset than otherwise. And so there are those in the podcasting space that are hyper concerned with things like the environment, especially related to this conversation, where conducting an exchange or conducting a purchase on most any of the blockchains, Bitcoin as an example, requires such an unbelievable amount of energy to make happen that, given our global warming and all those things that are going on, not a scientist, can't use better words than just global warming, but we know bad shit's going on, carbon footprints, et cetera, that to be creating that much energy expenditure to buy a Bored Ape seems like a really terrible, thoughtless thing to be doing. And the more I dug into it, I thought, it does seem like that's not such a fucking great idea. And so I spoke to some friends of mine who said, well, there are ways to mitigate. We can use side chains, which is funny. As an audio engineer, I think of side chain as something else, but side chains like Polygon to like assist in those transactions. So it's less than would be if you completely relied on the exchange happening on the Bitcoin blockchain, for example. But ultimately, still, it's a huge expenditure of energy that just doesn't need to be spent. And my listenership, I would say more of it than wasn't, that is the reason that those who have not bought in to some of my recent NFT, let's say, explorations.
Right.
And it's the reason that I've said, okay, I hear you on this. I'm going to continue to create the assets that will become NFTs, but I'm going to wait until the Ethereum blockchain in particular goes from proof of work to proof of stake, which is a much different expenditure of energy by like 99.9% reduction. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm like, NFTs, yes, love them, love the concept. But if I'm going to be on the Ethereum blockchain doing this, I've got to wait until this migration is done, which is supposed to happen at the end of the summer.
Yeah. It's also been supposed to happen for the last like 4 years, but it does seem like it's really supposed to happen. I think they're saying in August. And so for kind of the high level, and like Tanner and I, neither of us are crypto experts.
No, not by far.
If anybody is trying to tell you they're an expert in crypto, probably just run the other way because it's all still so new and it's all evolving so fast. I don't know if there's any experts, but I think for those people that are like, what is all this energy stuff? I think that the high level explanation of this for our listeners is like the way blockchain works is it's initially like, I think of it as a public ledger. It's kind of, there's a public ledger where every transaction is on that public ledger so that you can really verify and initially trace every single Bitcoin, if you will, or every single Ethereum coin. But to make that public ledger happen, anytime there's a transaction, that transaction and every other transaction that's connected to that has to be ran through the network of all of these computers around the world. And so initially, every time a transaction takes place, that initiates this massive verification. And on the other side, the beauty of it is there's it's verified that you own the asset that you own, and that can't really be counterfeited. But the con is there's this massive energy expenditure. So we don't have to get too much into like the Ethereum merger and different things, but there is like you said, like 99.9% reduction in energy. I think that's the number that I've heard. Don't quote us on it,
something.
But it's massive. It'll pretty much make the energy expenditure a non-problem for it.
Yeah.
So
I think I ran some carbon emission calculations. Again, not a scientist, just Googled, try to figure this out myself. This is like entrepreneur math, but on, but blockchain. And I think I found that currently, if you run a transaction on the Bitcoin network, it's like 70 days worth of energy for a single family home. That's how much ends up being used for that single transaction, which is insane. Post this migration on the Ethereum network and Ethereum is already about half of that. So Ethereum is already, and probably because it's smaller would be my guess, because if the network's bigger, more nodes are involved in the verification, thus more energy. Right. Ethereum is smaller, so smaller than the Bitcoin blockchain, so therefore less energy already. But after this switch, I'll retake it. Oh, I'm on my side anyway. I forgot about that.
You're good.
But after this switch, it will be equivalent to leaving like an LED light bulb on for the day, which is, you don't want to leave your lights on in your house all day, but I mean, I leave an LED light bulb on all the time. And by the way, I don't own a car. I take public transit and I own a bicycle. So I think I'm offset pretty well. Like at that point, I'm going to feel pretty comfortable minting NFTs if we get there.
And this kind of gets into the gas side of things too, because like, this is where gas fees come into play, where with a lot of NFT projects, okay, so to do this transaction, you have to do this massive energy consumption where initially there is some computer network around the world that is going to be processing this. So when you hit that purchase button on your Bored Ape, there is some miner, theoretically, it's kind of more complicated than this, but there's somebody mining that cryptocurrency and doing that somewhere that says, okay, I will do that on my computer. And so they get a gas fee. It's in Ethereum. Bitcoin doesn't do the gas fees, but Ethereum does. And so you have these gas fees where you might be in the lower end, you might be buying a $30 NFT. And depending on how busy the network is, you have to pay gas, and whoever's paying the most amount of gas, it's going to be
kind of
prioritized.
sets the market price or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So then, there's NFTs I've tried to buy where I was trying to buy a $30 NFT and it was going to be paying $80 in gas. And it was like, what the heck? Yep. Does this actually make sense? And so that was another problem and challenge that I ran into when I was starting to explore, like, what does this look like for NFTs and podcasters? I do think that there's a future with podcasters to be able to launch like a decently high volume of NFTs that are they're low barrier of entry. They might be $10, $20, $30, but that doesn't make sense if you were paying $30 and then $30 in gas.
Correct.
Is that something that did you get feedback or have you talked to people about that side of things too?
No, but I have my own feedback about that because when Dogecoin came out and all the meme coins came out, I of course got a little bit involved in that. And over the years I have thought, maybe I'll take $100 out of my Coinbase wallet or something. But then the gas fee is $30 to get 100 out. And I'm like, maybe I'll just hodl. It's not worth it. And I think a lot of people are doing that. Mm-hmm. Hodl, if nobody knows that term, hold on for dear life. It's a silly term. I
never knew what that actually meant. Like I knew what the term, I knew the principle, but that's awesome.
Yeah. So I have, for example, the first NFT I ever purchased was my own because I'm working, and you're aware of this company as well, with Uncut.fm. And I remember buying my own NFT, but to do it, I had to have Ethereum, which I had none of. So I went to go purchase some Ethereum, and I'm like, I don't know, I'll buy $100 worth of Ethereum, whatever that is. But then it said, you actually can't buy this Ethereum because you don't have enough Ethereum in your account to pay for gas. So I had to go through this whole rigmarole to actually get Ethereum inside of Coinbase, transfer it to my coin wallet, then use it to make the purchase and pay for the gas. So it was all, I think one of the things that people feel strongly about with NFTs is that there's so much, especially in the Ethereum network, and maybe only, that's really the only network that I have experience with, that there are these fees and there's this risk of losing your money and there's this up and down cycle that's very much like a stock market, even though that's not what the blockchain is and that's not how crypto works. It's not like a stock market. It seems like one when you see it going up and down because that's how we think of things that go up and down. We think of them as the stock market, but there's this fear that it's a trick, that somebody is duping us. And I don't think it helps. I don't think that while NFTs, I think the concept of NFTs happened maybe more than a decade ago. Like the idea of them, I can't remember who it was. It was like an artist and a husband and wife team who were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Mm-hmm. But that's not what it became. It became this thing where I'm going to send you a link to that article because it's a super interesting read.
Yeah,
I hope you'll include it in your show notes. I'll try to hunt it down. Mm-hmm. But NFTs have not been helping that whole, is this fake? Am I going to get scammed? Because people are paying $10,000 for a picture of an ape with a cigarette in its mouth and a tattoo on its arm wearing a sailor's hat. And it's like, what is happening? This feels like trickery.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really interesting. And like, I think there's so much education that has to happen from us as podcasters to our audiences, but also we have to do our due diligence to make sure that we're presenting it in a way that is authentic. And I think, you mentioned Uncut, they're sponsoring this podcast. And so people are going to hear a lot about them, but that was one of the reasons I really love their platform, is because all the complicated stuff that you mentioned for, gas fees and Coinbase and all of this stuff, you can pay for NFTs with those assets, but you can also just pay with a credit card, or you can claim a free NFT with your email address, and that digital wallet's created for you. And so that was really important for me. It was like, this process has to be simple, because the more friction there is, the less likely my audience is going to be to actually engage with it. Yep. And so that process had to be simplified. And I think we're starting to see more solutions that they're using the right blockchain networks so that, the gas fees and the environmental impact is more sound. But then also the process is more and more simple, so that our audience, if they said, yes, I want to do that, they're not going to have to spend a couple hours learning all of this crap that they have to go through and learning, how to transfer and delays and all of this stuff. Like, it's actually a simple process. So I think we're getting to a better place with it.
I think so too. And that goes back to what I said at the outset, was if it's going to be helpful once it's perfect, once all the bugs are worked out, once all the kinks are worked out, and once we get all these kind of semi-unethical to completely unethical bad actors out of the space, because those people are definitely out there, people who are making really crappy pieces of art and selling them at extremely high. But ultimately, I don't know how much different it is. I mean, in the real world where we're making physical purchases, is a painting by someone who died 30 years ago really worth $6 million? Is a Van Gogh really worth what it's worth? Is that true? I mean, the speculative nature of NFTs, because NFTs are, of course, everybody says it's art. I think people would disagree with that. Some people would disagree with that. But ultimately it is. It's an expression of creativity. It's art. In real life, art appreciates. One of the reasons that, for example, I have a lot of very rare books in my library, and one of the reasons that I buy them is because I know a 1550 printing of Straparola's Facetious Nights is going to accrue in value the longer I have it. But the other reason I have it is because I like it. Mm-hmm. How different is that really in spending $600 or $10,000 on a Bored Ape and hoping that the market appreciates such that it becomes worth $1 million? I mean, I don't know that it's that different. I just think that it feels very foreign because there are a lot of people, I'm only 39. There are people who are my age who I consider myself to be like a tech-raised kid. I understand technology pretty intimately. I gave you some of my background before. I mean, there are people who are my age who don't know how to use Word very well or don't understand Excel. Some of them may be listening to this podcast. And this process of buying NFTs and being on the blockchain and cryptocurrency, it seems overwhelming. It doesn't seem like going to a bank, putting in your credit card into the ATM, punching in a code and getting money back, or going to a store and giving the cashier some money and getting your change back. We're just so unfamiliar with this process that it is easy to make people, and I think some people are intentionally trying to make people feel this way, but feel afraid of this technology, feel like it's not a good investment. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong. Maybe it really is a terrible investment, but the way I feel is, this is just the next version of commerce. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that we'll be using the same names, and 3 years from now we might be like, hey, remember when we called them NFTs? Like, I don't know what we'll be calling it, and it might be like, remember when people used to say the World Wide Web? I don't really know.
And then you and I will be like, NFTs, remember when we called them GIFs?
Yeah, exactly. But the technology.
And then somebody a little younger than us will be like, it's GIF.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, the technology is not going anywhere, but it'll be interesting to see what we call it over time. Tell us about your project. I know that you're kind of waiting to promote your project until the merger, but you do have an NFT out right now. Tell us about that, and then tell us about what your future plans are for your show or shows in line with NFTs.
Sure. So I joined Uncut about a month or so ago and created the first ever NFT I'd ever minted. First I ever bought was my own NFT. It was a membership card to a community that is, I think we can think of it as paywalled, but instead of being gated by just $10 or something, it's gated by the ownership of an NFT, which also costs $10. So it's, it's the same. It's gated by some sort of purchase. And that community allows the members of that community to have a bi-monthly, to have a bi-monthly live session with me, like a group coaching call. I don't like to use the word coaching because I think there's some negative connotation with the word coaching, but essentially they get an opportunity to ask me all of the questions they have about the struggles they're having in podcasting, and I give them the best answers that I can. And the membership NFT costs $10 and allows them access to that. What I'm continuing to do, and that's only for people who buy the membership, but I've decided that a lot of people on Uncut are minting their episodes. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know how valuable the episode being minted is. Some people are having immense success with that on Uncut.
And by that, like they're minting their episodes, but they're like minting like it's a collectible attached to their episodes. So like just for our audience's sake, their episodes are still on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and different things.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, it doesn't paywall the content itself, but you get like a pretty looking thing that represents the episode and you own that thing. but usually it's kind of just the artwork or something that is kind of, I wouldn't say that the artwork is low quality. I would say that it's simply the artwork turned into an NFT in a lot of the cases that I see. And I'm like, I don't know if somebody wants to buy essentially an NFT every week for me or every day for me, which would be insane. The amount of energy I would be using to do that would be insane. Maybe they want something a little bit more unique, more in line with NFTs like Bored Apes or, the other things that you see on any of these NFT marketplaces. So I got the idea that since I create an episode every day of the week, Monday through Friday, maybe I could identify some sort of inside joke or some sort of something that could be visually represented in a piece of artwork in an NFT. And so I hired a visual artist and 3D animator to create what I just said. So, for example, in June, there was this big news about Acast, which is a podcast hosting provider
that Tanner loves.
Using I hate them. I mean, not the people, but I hate what they're doing.
They just bought Podchaser today.
I did. I saw that. Yeah. But they're using this very nefarious method of marketing where they scrape RSS feeds, which contain our email addresses, and then send us unsolicited emails to convert to their service from whatever service we're using to host our podcasting. And I railed on them for, I don't know, probably 3 episodes about that. And so the NFT I created is this little figurine in a trench coat with a money sack over his back, but it's got email address @ symbol on both sides of the bag. And he's got like a mask on. He looks like a criminal. And he's just kind of sneaking away. And I'm in the process of minting that right now. So I think that people who listen to the podcast would be like, oh yeah, that's the Acast thing. That's cool. I'll own that. And I'm selling those for $50 as opposed to, minting every single episode at $10 every day. Mm-hmm. That seems like overkill. But I think I think when people think of NFTs, they think of 2 things. They think, oh, I don't know if I should do that. That's sketchy. But they also think NFTs are kind of cool. I don't know anybody who has a problem with NFTs who doesn't also think, yeah, Bored Apes are kind of cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those pieces of artwork are pretty cool. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's really easy to criticize other people's collectibles or other people's guilty pleasures.
Sure.
And I think we all have to realize literally every single, nobody is the perfect financial, we're not perfect financial stewards. Maybe Dave Ramsey is, but I bet you even he has his guilty pleasures. We all have things that for some reason that might not make sense to others, we think oh, I want to buy this because this thing means something to me. And the way I see it going, I think things like what you're doing is going to be important for podcasters because it gives people a way to bookmark important things and to remember things that you said. And in a world where we have so much content, way too much content mm-hmm. that we could ever consume in our lifetime, I think it's important to document the content that matters to us. It's similar to why I have books and you have books. It's because those books matter to us and we want to remember them and we want to be able to go back. And so I wonder if the kind of collectible type NFTs that you're doing will do something like that for your audience. Is that kind of how you're seeing this going?
That's what I'm hoping happens. It's actually one of the things I really like about Uncut, and I noticed right from the get, is that they don't market NFTs or the concept of NFTs based on appreciation, mm-hmm. based on the idea that it's an investment. Instead, look, you're spending $10, you're going to get this thing. It's a collectible thing, a digital collectible. You can add it to your NFT wallet if you'd like. You can use it as your Twitter default profile profile image if you like. But you're purchasing this to, first and foremost, support an artist you care about. You're using regular money to do it, which kind of demystifies it. Mm-hmm. And yes, you're going to have a wallet. We're going to create it for you. Yes, this thing might appreciate, but that's not why you're buying it. And I like that because I think one of the problematic elements of NFTs is, again, they're very mystical. They're like, oh, so I'm going to buy this and what? It's going to be worth money later? No. I mean, yes, maybe. But no. That's not why you're doing that on Uncut. Instead, you're just supporting a creator.
Right.
And hey, it might appreciate or it might not. But that's not what you're doing it for. And I love that about Uncut, that they don't make it about, hey, this is an investment in your future. Instead, it's just supporting somebody that you would support on Patreon or anywhere else, mm-hmm. probably.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too with what's your first NFT called? The Tanner Club?
Oh, the Tanner Club. I'm not that full of myself. It's called the Gang.
The Gang.
So the name of the podcast is Good Morning Podcasters, and I just refer to the group that comes in as a member of the gang.
Yeah.
And this is a very little known fact. I don't think I've told anybody this. Maybe just my Discord, but the literature on the front of that membership card that says you're entitled to all the rights and honors, afforded a member of the gang. I actually ripped that copy from A Christmas Story. If you remember when he becomes a member of the Little Orphan Annie Club, he says, "Oh, honors and benefits at the age of 9," or whatever he says. So I used that. I thought that was funny.
That's awesome. So that's an interesting use case as well, because especially once the merger happens and once you start promoting it, like that will sell out. You have 100, they're worth $10, but then over the next couple of years, maybe even months, and as you get further on in your career, there only being 100 tickets to, let's say coaching, because you mentioned it, but to these bi-monthly coaching sessions with you, that's going to become increasingly more valuable. And so I think it'll be interesting too, especially because I know that you don't just work with anybody on a coaching level, like you value your time. And so I think as your network grows, then the value of that will also grow to where you could tell somebody, hey, if you want to be a part of the gang and be able to jump on our bi-monthly calls, there's go to the marketplace and go buy one of the tickets. And, I might keep mine forever, but I also might a year from now be like, you know what, I think I'm going to sell this for $250 and maybe somebody wants to, and you get a percentage of that. So it's not a huge money maker in the long run. I mean, if you become the most famous podcast coach in the world, it's probably a money maker, but you're probably also, it's more of a community builder to where you have this group of 100 kind of like super engaged fans. And I think that's going to be really interesting to watch as well.
Correct. And I think that from a money-making perspective for the creators, I hope there are creators listening to this episode, there is a benefit to us as creators in the zone of appreciation, which is that as more people buy these NFTs that we create on Uncut, in the example of this conversation, we are gaining Ethereum on the back end. Like we are getting, I'm saying we're getting wealthy in Ethereum, but that's not, at $10 an NFT, we're not getting wealthy in Ethereum. But if we do have, if we get to a point where we've got 1, 2, 30, 100 Ethereum, well, we're not really paying attention to it because the way it's acquired, I don't even check my balance on my Uncut wallet. To me, that money doesn't even exist, right, which is good because that money is accruing in the background for me as the creator.
Yeah.
And usually the way we make money is that we get money every month from Patreon and then we spend money every month on Patreon. But in this way, it's almost like Uncut encourages a kind of NFT savings account for creators, which I'm finding that I like, because at this point I have like a couple $100 worth of Ethereum, which is not a lot of money. But I know that as I roll this out and more people become interested in participating in it, that my wealth, quote unquote, in Ethereum will just grow. Mm-hmm. And as someone who, I try to keep a diverse portfolio of assets, of different asset classes, and not Bitcoin, but Ethereum, cryptocurrency is an alternative asset class. And, it's kind of cool that I'm accruing some amount of it on the back end.
Yeah, especially because that if you're bought into the vision of crypto in the long run, then you probably think that Bitcoin is going to be worth more than it is now, which is like around 20,000. And you probably believe that Ethereum is going to be worth more than the 1,000 to 1,500 it is now. So then that's growing in value in the long run. So yeah, I like the way that you're looking at that. It's going to be fun to see. We'll have to have you back on the show a couple months down the road. And that's kind of what we want to do on this show. Like we want to document journeys. And so we want to introduce you to some NFT projects. And then months later, we want to have people back on the show to say, hey, here's what we're learning. Here's what's working. Here's what's not working. So that really the listeners, podcasters, content creators can have a good idea of what works, what doesn't, and what the value is for NFTs in the podcasting space. So yeah, I appreciate you sharing some of your story. Would love to just give you an opportunity, any kind of parting words or thoughts for our listeners of who are podcasters trying to get into this space. What would your kind of encouragement or things to pay attention to be?
I would love it if you subscribe to my show and ask me questions so I could answer them.
And you should.
I would love it if you joined my Discord, which is free, and all kinds of great conversations happening in that Discord to both NFT. One of our channels is just called NFT shit because I think that, like most people, when people start talking about NFTs, a lot of people are like, oh God, people are talking about NFTs again. Please put that in some other channel so that we don't have to pay attention to that. So we talk about NFTs there in their own channel. If you're interested in Stoicism, check out Practical Stoicism at stoicismpod.com. There's a book out by the same name, Practical Stoicism. Please check that out. If you're into mythology and folklore, check out the Dictionary of Mythology and Folklore. I'd love to have you as a listener. And reach out to me however you like. Tanner at tannerhelps.com is the best way to get me. I'm happy to answer any questions I can. And I give away a lot of free help. So long as you're willing to be patient with my response, I usually won't charge you for an answer to a question. So I'm always happy to help. You can follow me on Twitter and pretty much anywhere else at Tanner Helps.
Love it. Tanner, thank you so much for joining us on the Minted podcast. I'm excited to see where your NFT journey goes over the next year or so and see how the gang develops. I'm also excited to be a part of the gang.
Well, thank you for having me, Seth, and I appreciate your membership in the gang, you gangster.
I'm a gangster. First time. I've probably been called a gangster, but now I am one. So it's the truth now. So thanks so much for joining us.
It's on the blockchain. It's verified.
It's true. It's verified.